Before we begin, if you believe in the power of second chances, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Your inspiring story could be next. The world had shrunk to the dimensions of a 1998 Ford Taurus station wagon. For Sarah Miller, its faded spruce green exterior and peeling wood panel decals were the walls of her home, its worn cloth seats her bed, and its glove compartment a cluttered pantry, holding a half-eaten bag of pretzels and 2 lukewarm bottles of water. Dawn and dusk were the most difficult hours. Dawn brought the cold, a damp chill that seeped through the windows and settled deep in her bones, a stark reminder of another night survived, but not truly lived. Dusk brought the anxiety, a frantic mental calculus of finding a new, safe place to park. A quiet corner of a Walmart parking lot, a forgotten residential street, or the back row of a 24-hour supermarket, anywhere she could become invisible until the sun rose again. Tonight, she was parked near a small community park. The silhouette of a swing set a lonely skeleton against the bruised purple sky. Condensation traced ghostly patterns on the inside of the glass. She wiped a small circle clear with the sleeve of her frayed sweater, watching a family pack up their picnic. A mother laughed, her head thrown back, as a small boy chased a soccer ball. The sound was a bittersweet melody from a life Sarah once knew, a symphony of normalcy that now felt entirely alien. She had once been the one to orchestrate such melodies. As a middle school music teacher, her days were filled with the chaotic but joyful sounds of off-key clarinets and enthusiastic, if clumsy, piano scales. Her life had been a composition of purpose and love, a duet with her husband, David. His memory was both a sanctuary and a source of profound pain. He was a history teacher with a poet's soul, a man who could find a story in a weathered brick and magic in a simple chord progression. He hadn't just loved her, he had understood the music within her. He was the one who bought her the Chopin scorebook, a beautiful leather-bound edition on their 5th anniversary. "Because his music," he'd whispered, his warm breath against her ear, "is what your heart sounds like, full of impossible beauty and quiet strength." That book now lay on the passenger seat, its worn cover a silent testament to everything she had lost. It was the only thing of true sentimental value she'd managed to grab before the bank seized the house. After David's sudden heart attack, the medical bills had piled up into an insurmountable mountain. His life insurance had been a fraction of what they'd thought, and her teacher's salary was a single shovel against an avalanche of debt. First went the savings, then the car David had driven, then the furniture, and finally the small yellow house with the crooked porch swing where they had mapped out their future. The scorebook was all that was left of that map. Her stomach rumbled, a low, embarrassing growl in the car's silence. The pretzels were gone. She counted the loose change in the center console. $3.67, enough for a cup of coffee and maybe a donut, but not a real meal. A familiar wave of shame washed over her. She was 42 years old, a college-educated woman, and she was counting pennies for sustenance. She started the car, the engine turning over with a reluctant groan. The gas light had been on for the last 10 miles. It was a choice between fuel for the car or fuel for her body. The car always won. It was her shelter, her shield. Without it, she wasn't just homeless. She was exposed, vulnerable, utterly lost. She drove toward the interstate where the gas stations were cheaper. The neon signs blurred through her tired eyes. And then she saw it. A go-go gas station. Its bright orange and blue sign a garish beacon in the encroaching darkness. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot through her. It was the same one. The exact same station where she and David had stopped on their first ever road trip, a spontaneous drive up the coast to see the autumn leaves. She remembered it vividly. David, goofy and exuberant, trying to use the squeegee as a microphone while singing an off-key rock ballad. She had laughed so hard she'd cried, leaning against the very pump she was now pulling up to. The memory was so clear, so painfully real, it felt like a ghost had slipped into the car beside her. For a moment she couldn't breathe. She sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, as the past and present collided. The laughter echoed in her ears, then faded, replaced by the hum of the engine and the relentless blinking of the empty tank icon. She needed to put $3 in the tank, just enough to get her through the night and to the public library in the morning, where she could search for jobs online. As she stepped out of the car, the cool night air a shock against her skin, she saw the sign taped to the glass door of the convenience store. Powerball jackpot, $227 million. She'd never been one to gamble. David had called it a tax on the hopeful, And they had always agreed it was better to build a life with your own two hands, but her hands were empty now. Her life wasn't being built, it was being dismantled piece by piece. She walked inside, the automatic chime of the door announcing her meager presence. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and hot dogs that had been rolling for hours. She went to the counter, intending to prepay for her $3 of gas, but her eyes kept drifting to the lottery sign. $227 million. It wasn't a number, it was a different universe. A universe with a roof, a warm bed, a hot meal. A universe where she could afford to grieve without the constant gnawing fear of what the next day would bring. She looked at the $5 bill in her hand, the last of her cash until a small freelance proofreading payment cleared in a few days. It was gas money. It was survival. But as she stood there, the memory of David's joyful singing echoing in her mind, a reckless, desperate thought took root. What was she surviving for? For another cold night in the car? For another day of feeling invisible? "One Powerball ticket, please," she heard herself say, her voice thin and reedy. The cashier, a teenager with bored eyes and an earbud in one ear, barely looked up. He slid the slip of paper and a tiny pencil across the counter. Sarah took it to the small ledge by the window. She stared at the grid of numbers, her mind a blank. How did people even choose? Then her gaze fell upon the Chopin book, visible on the passenger seat of her car. David. This crazy, foolish act was for him. It was a message in a bottle cast into a sea of chance. Her hand, though trembling slightly, moved with purpose. The first numbers came easily. 04, 12. For April 12th, David's birthday. The next set, 26. For the 26 years they had known each other. Then 33, the age he was when they married. She paused, her heart aching. The last numbers. She thought of the little house they had almost bought before he got sick, the one with the big oak tree in the backyard. She could still see the listing in her mind. 1150 Juniper Street. She filled in 11 and 50. She slid the paper back to the cashier, along with her last $5. He printed the ticket and handed it to her, the flimsy piece of paper feeling impossibly heavy in her hand. "Good luck," he mumbled, his attention already on his phone. Back in the car, a profound sense of foolishness washed over her. She just spent her last cash on a fantasy. She was irresponsible, delusional. She started to crumple the ticket but stopped. No, it was more than a ticket. It was a prayer, a tribute. She opened the Chopin scorebook to Nocturne in E-flat major, Op. 9. No. 2, the first piece David had ever heard her play, and carefully tucked the ticket between the pages. The next 2 days were a blur of hunger and waiting. She nursed a single cup of coffee at a diner for hours to stay warm, and spent the daylight hours at the library, pretending to read while the minutes crawled by. She refused to let herself think about the drawing. Hope was too dangerous a thing to entertain. The night of the drawing, she was parked in her usual spot behind the supermarket. She had the car radio on, the volume low, listening to a classical station. A news bulletin interrupted the music. They were announcing the winning Powerball numbers. Sarah's heart began to hammer against her ribs. She reached over and turned it off. She couldn't bear the confirmation of her own stupidity, the finality of the hope being extinguished. But she couldn't sit in the silence either. It was louder than the radio had been. With trembling fingers, she picked up her phone. The battery was at 8%. She opened her web browser and typed in the lottery website. The page loaded with agonizing slowness. And there they were, the winning numbers, displayed in a bold, unforgiving line. Her breath hitched. She fumbled for the scorebook, her fingers clumsy. She pulled out the ticket, her vision blurring. She held the phone and the ticket side by side, the faint glow of the screen illuminating the printed numbers. A match. A match. Her heart skipped a beat. A match. It was impossible. A match. A strangled sob escaped her lips. A match. She stared at the last number on the screen, 50, and the last number on her ticket, 50. Everything went silent. The hum of the supermarket's generator, the distant traffic, the frantic beating of her own heart, it all faded into a vacuum. She looked from the phone to the ticket, back to the phone again and again, convinced her tired, grief-stricken mind was playing tricks on her. But the numbers didn't change. They stared back at her, a perfect, impossible sequence, an echo of a life she had loved, now a gateway to a life she couldn't even begin to imagine. The tears came then, hot and silent, streaming down her face, dripping from her chin onto the flimsy piece of paper that had, in the span of a single moment, rewritten her entire world. The world inside the Ford Taurus remained unchanged, yet everything beyond its fogged windows had been irrevocably altered. For hours, Sarah Miller did not move. She sat in the driver's seat, the flimsy lottery ticket held in a death grip between her thumb and forefinger, the Chopin scorebook open on her lap like a holy text. The moon traced its slow arc across the sky, and the first hints of dawn began to soften the edges of the night. But Sarah was oblivious. Her reality had fractured, the timeline of her life split into a definitive before and an incomprehensible after. The number, $227 million, was an astronomical figure, a string of zeros that her mind couldn't process. It felt less like a sum of money and more like a cosmic joke, a wild, impossible twist of fate delivered to the back of a supermarket parking lot. A strange cocktail of emotions churned within her. There was a dizzying, vertiginous wave of relief that was so powerful it almost felt like terror. No more cold nights, no more counting pennies, no more gnawing hunger. But woven through it was a profound, gut-wrenching sadness. This colossal, life-altering event had happened, and David wasn't here to see it. She could almost hear his voice, the way he would have laughed, a deep, booming sound, and said, "Well, Sarah Bell, looks like you finally hit the right notes." The thought brought a fresh wave of tears, not of joy, but of a grief so sharp it stole her breath. This victory felt hollow, because she had no one to share it with. She was alone, now more than ever, adrift in a new reality she had no map for. As the sun finally rose, casting long shadows across the asphalt, survival instinct kicked in, overriding the emotional paralysis. This ticket, this miracle, was also a vulnerability. It was a tiny, fragile piece of paper that represented her entire future. The paranoia was immediate and intense. Every person who walked by, every car that drove past, felt like a potential threat. Her first coherent thought was not of celebration, but of protection. She carefully placed the ticket back inside the Chopin book, pushed the book deep into the glove compartment, and locked it. Then she locked the car doors, a gesture that suddenly felt laughably inadequate. Instead of driving to a shelter for a warm breakfast, she drove to the public library, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were carrying a precious, unstable explosive. She didn't look at job listings. She sat at a corner computer, her back to the wall, and typed, "What to do if you win the lottery," into the search bar. For the next 5 hours, she read everything she could find. She learned about the dangers of sudden wealth, the onslaught of requests from long-lost relatives and strangers, the statistics of winners who ended up broke and miserable. She read about trusts, annuities, lump sums, and the critical importance of assembling a team, a lawyer, a financial advisor, an accountant. The advice was unanimous: stay anonymous, tell no one, and move slowly. This was a world she did not know, a language she did not speak, but she was a teacher, she was a researcher. She approached it like a lesson plan. The next 2 days were a blur of furtive payphone calls and meetings in discreet coffee shops. She found a highly recommended estate lawyer, a kind elderly man named Arthur Vance, who specialized in sudden wealth management. He had seen it all, and his calm, paternal demeanor was a steadying anchor in her turbulent sea of anxiety. On his advice, she hired a reputable financial advisor. Together, they formed an anonymous trust, the Juniper Street Trust, a quiet nod to the dream house she and David had never bought. Only then, with a legal framework in place to protect her, did they make the call to the State Lottery Commission. The process of claiming the prize was surreal and anticlimactic. It wasn't a televised ceremony with a giant check. It was a series of sterile offices, notarized documents, and hushed conversations behind closed doors. Sarah, flanked by her new legal team, felt like an actress playing a part. When an official finally scanned the ticket and a quiet, "Congratulations, Ms. Miller," was offered, it still didn't feel real. She opted for the lump sum, a staggering $124 million after taxes. The number was just as incomprehensible as the first one. Her first act as a multimillionaire was not to buy a mansion or a sports car. She drove away from the lawyer's office, checked into a clean, respectable Marriott hotel, and stood under the hot water of the shower for 20 minutes, weeping until the water ran cold. That night she slept in a real bed for the first time in 14 months, buried under the weight of a thick, crisp duvet. The profound luxury of safety, quiet, and warmth was more overwhelming than any fantasy of wealth she could have ever conjured. In the weeks that followed, Sarah moved with quiet intention. She bought a reliable Subaru, a car that was safe in the snow, not one that screamed for attention. She rented a modest two-bedroom apartment in a quiet, leafy suburb, a place with big windows and a small balcony. She furnished it simply, finding comfort in clean lines and uncluttered spaces. For the first time in a long time, she had a door to lock, a refrigerator full of food, and a closet with more than 3 changes of clothes. She had reclaimed her dignity piece by piece, but the silence of the apartment was deafening. The money had solved all of her practical problems, but it couldn't touch the loneliness. It couldn't fill the empty space beside her on the sofa or bring back the sound of David's laughter. She realized that the frantic, daily struggle for survival had kept her grief at bay. Now, with nothing to fight against, the pain of his absence rushed in to fill the void. What was all this for? What was she supposed to do with this second chance she'd been given? The answer, as it always had, was resting on her coffee table, the Chopin scorebook. She ran her fingers over the embossed cover. The money was a tool, an instrument, but music was her purpose, her passion, and David's. One crisp autumn afternoon, she found herself driving through the familiar streets of her old town. She drove past the little yellow house. A new family lived there now. A child's bicycle lay tipped over on the lawn. There was no pain, only a gentle sense of nostalgia, a peaceful closing of a chapter. Then, on an impulse, she drove to Northwood Middle School, where she had taught for nearly 15 years. She met with the principal, a woman she'd worked with for years. The news was disheartening. Severe budget cuts had forced the school to make difficult choices. The music program had been the first to go. The dedicated music room was now a storage closet for old desks and cleaning supplies. The school's collection of instruments, some of which Sarah and David had fundraised for themselves, were broken, gathering dust. Walking down the hallway, Sarah peeked through the small window of the music room door. She saw the ghost of what it had been, the risers where the choir used to stand, the spot where the old upright piano had been. She saw a dozen versions of her younger self, full of passion and energy, trying to teach a classroom of restless teenagers the difference between a crescendo and a diminuendo. And she felt David's presence beside her, his hand on the small of her back, sharing her frustration and her love for this place. In that dusty, forgotten room, her purpose became crystal clear. This was what the money was for. She didn't just write a check. That would have been too easy, too impersonal. Through her lawyer, she anonymously established the David Miller Harmony Project, a foundation dedicated to funding and restoring music education in under-resourced public schools throughout the state. She hired a small, passionate staff, and then, using a pseudonym, she signed up to be one of the foundation's first volunteers. 3 months later, Sarah stood at the back of the newly reopened Northwood Middle School music room. It was transformed. The walls were painted a cheerful blue, acoustic panels lined the ceiling, and the shelves were filled with brand new instruments, gleaming flutes, polished violins, and shiny trumpets. The centerpiece was a beautiful baby grand piano. The room was filled with the chaotic, joyful noise of students choosing their instruments for the first time. Sarah moved through the crowd, her heart full. She knelt beside a small, shy girl who was struggling to hold a cello. Sarah gently adjusted the girl's hands, showing her how to hold the bow. The girl drew it across the strings, producing a low, resonant groan. Her eyes widened, a look of pure wonder on her face. In that small, miraculous moment, Sarah felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt since David's death. She wasn't just a wealthy benefactor, she was a teacher again. She was sharing the gift that had saved her life, and in doing so, honoring the life of the man she had loved. She was creating a legacy not of money, but of music. Later that evening, long after the last student had gone home, Sarah sat alone at the new piano. The room was quiet, filled with the lingering energy of hope and possibility. She placed her fingers on the cool ivory keys and began to play. The familiar, haunting melody of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the space. The notes were imbued with the sorrow of her past, but also with the strength of her present and the bright promise of her future. The money hadn't been the destination, it had been the key that unlocked the door. The true prize was this, the chance to compose a new life, one built not on what she had lost, but on the enduring beauty of what she had to give. She played on, her music a testament to the fact that even after the longest silence, a song of hope can always begin again. Luck isn't just about finding a winning ticket. It's about the rediscovery of purpose when everything seems lost. The money gave Sarah the chance to rebuild her life, but it was music, the memory of her husband, and the decision to use her gift to help others that truly saved her. The story teaches us that true wealth isn't found in what we accumulate, but in what we share, and that even in the darkest nights, there is always a melody of hope waiting to be played. Enjoyed Sarah's journey? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more inspiring stories.